Now, those of you associated with the space program will probably recognize this model as the Mariner 10 spacecraft for the Venus-Mercury probe. This scale model of the Mariner spacecraft is one of 50 such models produced for the Jet Propulsion Laboratory by a simulated company composed of college-age, high school, and junior high school age industrial art students in the Los Angeles area. This company of students was totally responsible for the production of these scale models. For all practical purposes, the company functioned as you would expect it to function, with the exception that profits and wages were absent. There were work divisions, shipping schedules, time cards, materials to be purchased, and deadlines to be met. This was truly a unique educational experience for everyone involved. Now, our story really begins at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory when the Mariner 9 spacecraft was on its way to Mars. Many of the scientists and engineers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory were already thinking ahead to the Venus-Mercury probe. The Public Affairs Office felt that while the Venus-Mercury program was developing, planning should begin to explain the Mariner 10 space program to the general public. It was here that the idea came about for a joint educational project between JPL and the California State University at Los Angeles. The Industrial Studies Department would contract with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory for the entire project. They would form a company within the Industrial Studies Department with select students acting as employees whose charge would consist of producing 50 1/10 scale models of the Mariner 10 spacecraft and an accompanying brochure. Other schools would be brought into the project as divisions of the company where specific jobs would be performed. This idea seemed very workable, so Cal State Engineering and Manufacturing was created. Intra-divisional communications were established. Flow charts were tentatively drawn up, and the production responsibilities for each division were set out. So when Central Division at Cal State received the actual blueprints for the Mariner 10, work could begin. The blueprints arrived from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and the office work began immediately.
You're talking about this camera. Okay, yeah, some of these divisions are chafing at the bit now for some drawings and for some materials, so let's cover some of these last-minute problems and get them out, particularly on this wood base.
Now wait, are you purchasing it?
Yes, purchasing it, deciding on the materials.
Let's ask purchasing then. What were your estimates for a full run on these bases so far?
Well, I was talking to several lumber companies, and we could get a real good buy on walnut material.
One of the early responsibilities in this project was the creation of an engineering record. Part names, nomenclature, and part numbers, all the classification and terminology must be decided beforehand. This was needed for the records which would be kept when draftsmen checked out parts. Records were kept of the draftsman's name, the name and number of the part, when it was assigned, and when it was due to be completed. All this information was logged into the engineering file. At the Cal State Foundry, molds for the main body of the spacecraft, called the bus, were being prepared for casting. A pattern of the bus had been prepared in the department. Then it was placed in a flask, and the special foundry sand was sifted around it. The sand was then rammed up or squeezed around the pattern to form the cavity for the casting. Into these molds, the molten aluminum was poured to form the metal body of the spacecraft. From the foundry, the rough castings of the bus were shipped to the Pasadena division, where specialized machinery was used in the next process. First, the castings were chucked up in a lathe, and the two ends were trued up. Then each bus was placed in a special piece of tooling developed at the Pasadena division for the numerically controlled milling machine, which enabled it to shape all sides of the bus. A punch tape program was used here to guide the machine as it performed the task of shaping. Next, each bus had 17 holes drilled to exact specifications which would be used in a later assembly.
Okay, Larry, we're having some real nasty problems on the tolerances between the post and the bus. Now, the posts just aren't fitting in there. Do you have any suggestions how we can cure this before we get too far into the production run?
Well, rather than increase the size of the hole, that would require a special reamer, or one that's oversized. I feel that, our machinist can keep this down to real good tolerance.
So increase the minus.
Right, we'll increase the minus side of this.
At the Regional Occupational Center Division, another drilling process was being performed. Here, a specialized piece of tooling was developed for the numerically controlled mill so that 28,000 exact holes could be drilled into the stringers of the solar panels of the spacecraft. While the 28,000 holes were being drilled in the solar panels, another group at the ROC division was making two of the parts for the stand on which the spacecraft would eventually rest. First, a base post was turned, drilled, tapped, and polished. At the same time, the bushings that would fit into the walnut base were being turned and polished for later submission to quality control for final inspection. Back at Cal State in Central Division, another special piece of tooling was developed for the production of high-gain antenna dishes. The dishes, made of thin sheets of styrene, were being produced with a vacuum forming process. The sheets were put in place, heat was applied, and then as the tooling was slowly inserted, the plastic was drawn down around the mold. The dishes were then stripped away from the mold to be set aside for a later assembly. The process of injection molding was also used in the project. A piece of tooling was made specially for this molding process at Central Division, and the tooling was then shipped to the Garfield Division. At Garfield Division, a clear styrene was injection molded, making louvers that would eventually fit on the bus, and cross members to be used on the solar panels. Along with the different metal and plastics used, there was a place for wood in the project. At the San Gabriel Division, the bases were manufactured. The wood was cut, shaped, and drilled for the aluminum bushing. A Danish oil was then applied for a finish. All the parts for the base on which the Mariner 10 models would rest were now finished and ready to be assembled. Another wood manufacturing operation was carried on at Central Division. The Mariner models required a carrying case for safety and protection in travel. The wood sheets were first cut and shaped to fit the model. The carrying cases were glued up as a sealed unit and later cut open. They were glued by a special electronic wood welder. The glue was cured almost immediately, as the wood welder created an inner heat in a manner similar to that of a microwave oven. Hinges, a latch, and handle were then attached to complete the case. At the Bosco division, we found photography in use. There was a pamphlet to be prepared explaining how this simulated company called Cal State Engineering and Manufacturing was organized. There was copy to be transcribed on tape. There were photos to be retouched and ready for printing. There was paper to be cut. And printing machines to be prepared for high-speed reproduction. Along with the printing of the pamphlets at the Bosco division, there were solar panels to be photographically reproduced back at the Central division. A multicolor negative of an actual solar panel had been supplied. This negative was enlarged onto color photographic printing paper. The photos were then processed and later secured to the solar panel. During this whole time, the accounting branch at the Walnut Division was at work. Each week, the time cards for the entire company were sent to this division. And in return, company checks were issued every other week to each employee in the company. These checks would have represented actual wages had this been an actual manufacturing firm. Along with all the accounting responsibilities, The Walnut Division was also responsible for the production of various metal parts, motor tubes, lens hoods, antenna booms, and brackets. The Stevenson Division was located at Stevenson Junior High School in Los Angeles. This division was responsible for the printing of all necessary paperwork to keep the company operating. They also generated the many rubber stamps required and the metal manufacturer's plates that went on the final product. At Central Division, the cameras were receiving their solar blankets. The material that was used for these solar blankets is the same material used on the actual Mariner 10 spacecraft to protect the television cameras from the sun's intense heat, as the spacecraft will fly closer to the sun than any man-made object. As different stages of production and assembly were completed in each division, they were shipped to Central Division where the final assembly took place. As the assembly of the units was completed, the spacecraft models were mounted on their individual stands, placed in their carrying cases with the pamphlets, and delivered to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. When the final spacecraft models were delivered, a joint educational project was completed that had been rewarding to all. Those who had worked in the production of these 50 models had gained an insight into industrial procedures that would be valuable as they went on into industry and education. And the models themselves would serve as educational tools as they were used across the country to help explain to the public the mission of the Venus-Mercury probe, the Mariner 10.
Building this model involved a great many educational experiences.
This model is 1/10 the actual size of the Mariner.
Photography was used as a tool here on the solar